Hello everybody, I'm Nick, and in this video I'm going to show you how you can get started with Dapper, an object relational mapper or ORM that allows you to connect to a database very efficiently and run queries or create, update or delete resources. Now, Dapper is by far the most popular ORM in .NET. The second one should be at this point EF Core because it has improved quite a bit over the years. But Dapper in many ways is the go-to standard, and I don't have a video that shows people how to get started with Dapper. So if you're a more junior developer, you want to learn what Dapper is and how it works and really why you should be using it and how, this video will explain all that. Now, in very basic terms, an ORM or object relational mapper is a library that can execute queries to a database and map that to a model in your system. So you don't have to basically read every single row and every single column and try to match that to an object. Instead, it's going to be mapped automatically. So all you say is select the first movie from this table and map it automatically to a movie. It's a very powerful concept that makes working with databases extremely easy and straightforward. The great thing about Dapper is that it's very performance oriented, so it's extremely fast, almost as fast as using raw SQL in your C# code, but also doesn't sacrifice much in user experience. So it is very easy to use. So in this video, I'm going to show you all that, and we're going to do that against a real database. We're going to use Postgres in this video because it is an extremely popular database and it's my personal favorite, the one I use in production as well every day. So I feel I can talk about it very reliably. And we're going to be using one that runs on the cloud in this video to show you how we're connecting to a real database and not just one running locally or SQLite and such. And for that database, we're going to use AWS, and this video is sponsored by AWS. And if you want to find out how you can get $50 worth of credit on AWS, check the link in the description down below. You don't have to use AWS or any other cloud provider, but in this case, we're going to see a free tier. So if you just want to learn how to integrate with a database, that is a great way to do it. So let's take a look at what we have here. I have this movies API, and it is a .NET 8 API that uses minimal API endpoints to create a movie, get a movie by ID, get all movies, update a movie, or delete a movie, all your basic CRUD operations. And this is all done, as we're going to see in this movie service over here, this is all done in memory. So we're using an in-memory list of movies, and all the operations are using this specific in-memory list. So creation, retrieval, update, and delete all goes in memory. It means that every time we restart the application, we lose all the data and none of it is persisted. And that's what we're going to use to implement a real database logic into. So if I just go ahead and run this API just to show you what we're going to be interacting with, the model is very simple for this video. We have an ID, we have a title, and we have a year of release. The more complex the object, the more things you have to deal with, but I do want to give you a very straightforward idea of how this works. So I'm going to keep it simple and small. So let's go to Insomnia to run a few queries. So if I go and say get all movies, you're going to see that I have no movies in here. So the array is empty. If I say create a movie, then we are going to create a movie, and we're going to get the ID over here. If I go back to get all movies, as you're going to see, we have this one item. I can go now to get movie. Here we go, and I can use the ID. If the ID doesn't match, then of course we're going to get a 404. I could also update it, and then I can delete it. So if I say delete, we get 200. Yes, it was deleted. If I try to delete it again, well, it was deleted already. So 404 not found. And that's it in terms of functionality. That's the landscape we're going to come in and add our database. Now, like I said, we're going to use AWS, and I'm going to very quickly show you how we can create the database we're going to use in this application. This is all part of the free tier, so it doesn't really cost you anything as long as you don't exceed those limits. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for RDS, which gives me access to the Managed Relational Database service in AWS. And as you can see over here, if I go to databases, I already have one created. That's because I don't want to just wait around for my database to provision. I just want to go straight into showing you how to work with this. But if you don't have one and you want to just create one in AWS, all you have to do is create database. You can select standard create. We can choose PostgreSQL over here. Now, the engine version depends on what you want to do. I usually use the latest major version, and then I go and choose free tier because, again, we don't want to pay anything. We're going to scroll down, give your database an identifier, and then you want to have a username. You can either self-manage a password for the database or use Secrets Manager, which is more secure, and then securely load this. I have made a video showing you how to do this as well. And if we scroll down, as you can see over here, we can choose things like storage and so on. We don't really need auto scaling for this. I'm going to just turn it off. We don't need to connect through any C2 compute resource, so I don't have to select any of that. Select the VPC. Then we say public access over here, so we can actually access it from our machine, and then not much over here. And then what you would do is, turn off performance insights, and then just say create database. The other thing you probably need to do, if we go back to databases, is that when this is provisioned, in order to access it, you have to go to the VPC security groups, and you want to select the security group, and then you want to go and select edit inbound rules. This will give you a view like this. If there's already a rule, just go ahead and delete it, and you want to say add rule, custom TCP. The port we want to allow access to is 5432, and then we want to select that we want to allow access, in my case, from my IP. I won't select that because I don't want you to see my IP, but you can choose anywhere IPv4 as well and save rules, and that will just allow access to your database. And once we do that, we should be able to come here, and in Rider, I have the option to connect to a database through the ID and see all the tables and databases I have. So I'm just going to say add data resource manually. Then I'm going to select Postgres because, well, I'm connecting to a Postgres database. The endpoint I'm connecting to, the host, is this one. The endpoint of the database in the service, I'm going to say next. Then is Postgres for the username, and subscribe for the password, of course, subscribe. And then I can select the database over here. So if I select the dropdown, some of them will be loaded. So the database I want is DomeTrain. I'm going to say test connection, and it should be all good. So connect to database. And now, as you're going to see over here, I have my database over here with all its schemas loaded. Currently, I have no tables. If I had, they would show up here on this public schema. So we will create the database to be able to store this movie over here. Now, as opposed to EF Core, where you can actually scaffold a database and a schema out of your C# code, Dapper doesn't have that. There are some libraries that allow you to do that are third party, but in this case, you actually have full control over the creation of the table, indexes, PKs, FKs. You have full control over everything. The only thing that Dapper automates is how you execute your queries. So we're going to go ahead and create a new table. We could create just the SQL itself, but just to make it easy for everyone, I'm going to say movies over here as the table, and then I'm going to add a few columns. So I'm going to say add a new column, and I'm going to call that what was it title, and this will be text over here. Then I'm going to add the ID, which the ID is actually a UUID. There is a type supported here. So let's add that. Is of course not null because it will end up being our key. In fact, if I go to keys and I say primary key, this primary key will be the column name ID. So our ID is a PK. This really bothers me. So let's just move the order. ID goes first. And then let's add another column. It is the year of release, and that is an integer. Now, because it's a year and usually it's like 1990 something all the way to 2000, you can be more efficient and use like a small int, but we don't really want to bother with database optimization at this point. That is something for another video. So with all that, none of this should be null and none of this should be null. These are mandatory. So it generates the SQL and I can say create, and now we have our movies table. So now we have the schema of what we're going to store in here, but we actually have to adapt all that now and write the code that works with the database in C#. And in order to do that, like I said, we're going to use Dapper. So I'm going to search for Dapper over here and install this library. And this library is effectively an extension on the database connection, meaning that because the database connection itself is an abstraction over a connection, Dapper is an extra package on top of whatever you would use to connect to the database. As long as that's using a DB connection, you should be able to use Dapper with it. So npg SQL is the library we need for Postgres. So I'm just going to go ahead and install that. And those are the two packages I need. And now I have everything I need to go and configure all the connection related things. Now, a thing I like to do over here, so I want to create a database directory. And here I want to create a DB connection factory. Now, this will be the npg SQL connection factory, but I'm also going to have a public interface called idb connection factory. And this is what will have the create database connection method. So I'm going to say task idb connection. That's the thing we're going to be using with Dapper to run those queries. So I'm going to say create connection async, and we can pass a cancellation token as well. So we can say token, and we can say equals default as the default value. And now this npg SQL DB factory will implement that method. And all we're going to say is var connection equals new npg SQL connection. And we're going to pass down the connection string, which we will inject. So private read-only string, connection string. You can inject other things in here as well. You can inject things like the npgs connection wrapper if you want. We're going to connect the connection string as well. And maybe in the future, we're going to see how we can do some more advanced things, because especially if you use Aspire here as well, you can get some metrics out of it too. If you have a different type of registration. Again, I'm not going to complicate this too much, but we have room for different things we can take this video to later. So if you want to see a more deep dive on this topic, please leave a comment down below and let me know. And if you want to check how you can do similar things with EF Core, we actually have an 8-hour course on DOM Trainer, which is part of our 7-day free trial. So you can just use the link in the description, sign up for that, watch the course, and then you can cancel anytime. So we have the connection over here, but we want to turn this into async because I want to say connection.open async. We want to open that connection, pass down the cancellation token as well, and then return that connection. Now, what we're going to have to do is register this in here. So what I'm going to go ahead and say is builder.services.add singleton idb connection factory. And I'm going to register this over here as a new connection factory, but we're going to get the connection string from the options because we have access to the builder.configuration, and we're going to say db connection string. This is definitely not null. Here we go. And we're going to set this value in the app settings.json. So we're going to say db connection string is over here with all the connection details for that Postgres database. So now we have that, we pass it down, and it's a singleton, but it will operate as a transient dependency because we're going to have to call the create connection on every call, which is what we want because we're going to pull those connections for the database. Now we have to make sure we dispose them, but if we do that, this will all work fine. So now ultimately we have the way to create connections for the system, which means I can go into my service since I registered this already, and I can say private read-only idb connection factory and just inject that because we registered it through the constructor. And now we have to implement the add, retrieve all, update, and delete method. So for the add, first we want to get a db connection. So we're going to say await db connection factory.create connection async. And since we have that, that's the thing that Dapper is integrating with. So now every time I say dot on the db connection, I'm going to get all of these using Dapper extensions, such as execute query, execute async, execute reader. All of these are Dapper extensions that allow me to integrate with my database. And we do this very, very efficiently. Don't worry that it says dynamic over here in the return type. By default, Dapper, if we say, for example, query async, if we say select everything from movies, Dapper will actually allow us to do the following. It will allow us to say for each item in the result, and then item is dynamic, so we can use the name of the column as the name of what we want to use. So for example, if here I have ID or title as the name, I can say title, and this will give me the movie title over here without having to have an object. And this is great, it is fantastic, but it is better and safer to actually do this with a concrete type. And we're going to see that in a second. But for now, we just have this connection. And if I want to just create a resource in the database, what I want to say is db connection.execute async because I want to execute an insert command. And now I'm going to have my SQL. So if I just do this, just so you can see everything better, if I just do this, now I can have my string literal to write my SQL. So all I want to do is insert into, and then the table name, in this case, it is movies. And then I want to select which columns I want to add. So ID, title, and year of release. And then I say values. And now it's time for me to pass down the values. Now, the way Dapper works is you use the @ symbol on the value you want to pass down. And then you just name this variable. So ID, then @ symbol, title, and then @ symbol, year of release. Here we go. And let's actually go ahead and change the dialect to Postgres. So we get nice help here. Here we go. And then we have this warning go away. And Now that we have parameters, we need to somehow pass down parameters for this query to run. Well, if I say comma here, then I have the ability to pass down an object, and the object I want to pass down is the movie. Now, because these names match the property names of the object I'm passing, ID, title, and year of release, the ORM aspect of Dapper will kick in and map those properties to those parameters. So the ID of the movie goes here, the title goes here, and the year of release goes here, without me having to do anything. Now, if for some reason I wanted to name this year, for example, not year of release, then I break this continuity and the thing won't automatically match. And I would need to do something like this. I would need to have an anonymous object that says ID. So this has to match this. ID is movie.id. Then title is movie.title. And then year, the same way it is here, equals movie.year of release. So we can deviate from how it should be called. And in fact, we can actually omit this because the parameter name matches the variable. So we don't need to set them explicitly. We'll do the exact same thing. And now here we have the exact same thing as before, but with a different name on that column. We don't want to have that. So instead, I'm going to change this over here and I'm going to pass it down again to movie. As a response back, execute async will give you how many items have been affected by this query. So in this case, we do expect to have 1, but that's the bare minimum we need for this execution. Now, if we go over here in this get the movie async, what we want to do is, again, we want to get a connection. So let's just grab that. We have a new connection over here, but now we don't want to execute async a query. We want to get something back. We're going to say movie equals await db connection dot query, and because we want one thing, because this is a get by ID, we're gonna say query, and you have two options here, either first or default async or single or default async. This does not work exactly the same way as in EF Core. In EF Core, if you use single or default, you add a top 2 or a limit 2 to your query. If you use first or default, you use a top 1 or a limit 1. Here, because we actually control that conversion, that SQL, we don't have to worry really about this on a conversion SQL level. So we only really need to worry about it on an operational level. So for that reason, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to say, select everything from movies where ID equals the parameter named ID, limit 1. So just give me 1, which means that the moment you find a single match, come back. So this single or default can never really fail because of a duplicate match, because we should only find 1 over here, and this is a PK anyway. So it will only return either the value or null, which is exactly what we want, but we have to pass down a parameter, and to do that, we're going to say new object and pass down the ID. Then we're going to say return the movie, and that is it. In this case, this is so small, we can actually simplify to a simple raw string. Now, the difference to before here is that this will just return dynamic and try to automatically map it, but we don't want to do that. What we want to do instead is we want to map this to a movie. So we say that what you're returning now automatically try to object map to a movie object, and we don't have to specify its parameter automatically. We could say that, hey, I want to be very explicit with the ID, the title, and the year of release, because we need to map it to the movie object, but in this case we don't, so we just say select everything. But if you want to have a narrower scope of that object you stored for any reason, then you can be explicit about those parameters, and the same mapping rules work for reading the object as well as writing. Now, for the returning everything, what I want to say is, again, get the connection, and then say return await db connection dot query async, pass down that movie parameter, and then just say select everything from movies. And that is it. It will be automatically mapped and returned to the user. Now for update, very much in many ways, same story as in the beginning, but instead of having an insert into movies, we're going to have an update. So we're going to say await db connection, execute async, and we're going to do the same thing as before. Here we go. So we're going to say update movies, and we're going to say set the title to be equal, because that's the thing we're updating. So to be equal to the title, and the year of release to be equal to the year of release, and all that where ID equals the ID. And that's it. Now, all I have to do is pass down the movie I want to update. And that is it. The last thing we need to do over here is to have the delete. So all we want to get is the connection again. Then we're going to get the result because we want to see how many rows were affected. And then dbconnection.execute async delete from movies where ID equals the ID. We're going to pass down the ID over here. That's it. That's all you need to do. Is so super straightforward. Again, we have all the parameter and variable mapping here. We want to just set this to this value over here. But once we do all that, we actually don't need to change anything else. All I need to do here for this to work is just go and execute it. Now, I want to remind you, I have no movies in my system. But if I go now and I go to Insomnia and I say, let's get all the movies, I'm going to get an empty collection because there's nothing there. And again, blazing fast requests. Then I'm going to go over here and say, create a movie. And the movie was, again, rapidly created. I'm going to select this ID and copy it. But if I go to get all movies now, I can get this movie. And if I refresh over here, we can see that this movie now exists in the system, mapped automatically to the correct values, the correct rows, the IDs are working, the titles are working. And I had to write minimal SQL. The extension methods of Dapper do all the heavy lifting for me, and they map those responses straight into the object I'm getting back. If I go and I say update a movie, I can simply use the ID here and say update this movie. And as you can see now, the movie has been updated. And if I say get all movies, the year of release gone from 2012 to 2023. And I can also say get a movie by ID. Same thing as before. Again, the code for all this in the description down below. You can just click the link and download the code. And then if I go to delete and I say deleted, then I'm going to get an exception. Let's see why I got an exception. Operator does not exist UUID. Let's go ahead and see why this happened. A bit of a live debugging. Not everything works first time. So if I go all the way down, as you're going to see, I did not follow my own advice and I actually pasted the ID itself, not an object wrapper of the ID. I have to say new and pass down the named ID in here. Now I can just hot reload over here. My application has restarted without me having to explicitly restart it. And I'll go over here and just say delete now. And now it was in fact deleted successfully. And if I do it again, I get the 404 not found. Simple as that. Remember to wrap even individual values in a new anonymous object so the mapping can actually happen. One thing I have to point out is remember to dispose those connections. If you don't, you will end up starving this thread pool. I know, and ask me how I know. I've done it accidentally. So make sure you dispose them and everything else will just work. You do have to know your SQL for this to work, but I do think that you should, if you are a developer and you want to go somewhere and you want to go find your career, you should really know your SQL. It's not going anywhere. You know, there's so many NoSQL databases, but for many of them and for many systems, the bedrock of all data storage is still a SQL database. In fact, DomTrain, my platform, is all backed by a managed Postgres as well. And we're dealing with so much traffic, but they're just so reliable. And in the cloud environment specifically, they get all that resilience by default and you don't have to manage them yourself. Now, if you don't want to choose to do that, you don't have to, but it does make things easy for a price. Now, in terms of getting started, that's all I want to cover, but I do want to know from you, if you want me to make a deep dive on any of this, please leave a comment down below and let me know, and I will do that. And I wonder from you, are you using EF Core or Dapper? Where do you stand with this debate? Are you more of a, I don't need to know SQL, or are you more of a hands-on person? Leave a comment down below and let me know. Well, that's all I had for you for today. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, keep coding.